There exists a fundamental truth about human nature that most people spend their entire lives refusing to acknowledge. The world does not value what comes easily. Whether we examine the glittering diamond pulled from the depths of the earth, the masterpiece that took years to complete, or the counsel of a sage who speaks only when wisdom is truly required, the pattern remains consistent. Scarcity creates value. Difficulty creates desire, and those who make themselves freely available to everyone become valuable to no one. This is not cynicism. This is reality observed through clear eyes, stripped of the comfortable delusions we tell ourselves about how the world should work. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this centuries ago when he observed the courts of power, watching how princes who gave their favor too freely soon found themselves surrounded by opportunists and abandoned by allies. He saw how those who made themselves rare became sought after, how those who established boundaries commanded respect, and how those who valued themselves highly taught others to do the same. The lesson was never about cruelty or arrogance. It was about understanding a simple economic principle that governs not just commerce, but human relationships, professional advancement, and personal dignity. That which is abundant is taken for granted, while that which is scarce is treasured. You are not a commodity to be distributed freely. You are gold. And gold does not scatter itself across the streets hoping someone will notice its worth. Consider the person who answers every call, accepts every invitation, makes themselves available at any hour for any request. In their mind, they are being generous, kind, a good friend or colleague. But observe what happens over time. The calls become demands. The requests become expectations. The appreciation fades into entitlement. Not because people are inherently cruel, but because human beings are pattern recognition machines who quickly adjust their behavior based on what they can reliably obtain. When you teach people that your time, energy, and presence have no cost, they will treat these things as having no value. This manifests in every domain of existence. In professional life, the employee who works unpaid overtime, who takes on every additional project, who never says no, believes they are demonstrating dedication. Instead, they are demonstrating that they can be exploited without consequence. Their manager does not see commitment. They see a resource to be utilized maximally. When promotion time arrives, they will be passed over for someone who established boundaries, who made their contributions feel like privileges granted rather than services expected. The harsh mathematics of the workplace rewards those who create scarcity around their expertise, not those who give it away freely. In personal relationships, the dynamic mirrors precisely. The friend who drops everything whenever called upon, who rearranges their life to accommodate others, who never expresses their own needs or boundaries, does not build deep friendships. They build dependencies. And dependencies, unlike genuine relationships, are abandoned the moment a more convenient source appears. True friendship requires mutual respect. And respect cannot exist where one party has trained the other to expect unlimited availability. The friend who occasionally says, "I cannot help you today, I have my own priorities," is teaching a crucial lesson about their worth. They are saying, "My time is valuable, my energy is finite, and I choose how to allocate these resources." The romantic realm offers perhaps the clearest illustration. Someone who makes themselves completely available, who has no life outside the relationship, who requires no pursuit or effort, who gives everything with no reciprocity required. This person creates not passion but boredom. They remove the fundamental dynamic that sustains desire, the pleasant challenge of winning something valuable. The person who maintains their own interests, who has boundaries around their time, who does not rearrange their entire existence for a partner, paradoxically creates more desire than the one who offers unlimited access. This is not game playing. This is honoring your own completeness as an individual, recognizing that you are not half a person seeking completion, but a whole person choosing partnership. But here we must pause and address the obvious objection. Is this not simply selfishness disguised as self-respect? Is this not encouraging people to become cold, calculating, and transactional in their relationships? The question misunderstands the fundamental argument. There is an enormous difference between valuing yourself and devaluing others. The person who values themselves like gold does not treat others as worthless. They simply refuse to treat themselves as worthless. They recognize that genuine generosity can only flow from a position of abundance, not depletion. The person who gives themselves away indiscriminately has nothing left to truly give. They become a resentful martyr, keeping score of every sacrifice, bitter about the lack of reciprocity they never requested but always expected. Valuing yourself like gold means understanding that your worth is inherent, not contingent on how much you can do for others. It means recognizing that your time is the most finite resource you possess. Once spent, it cannot be recovered, unlike money or possessions. It means understanding that self-sacrifice without self-preservation leads not to nobility, but to burnout. The person who maintains their own boundaries, who charges appropriately for their skills, who expects respect and reciprocity in relationships, is not being difficult. They are being sane. Consider the consultant who charges premium rates for their advice. Are they being greedy? Or are they signaling that they have invested years developing expertise, that their time could be allocated elsewhere, and that clients who pay appropriately will value and implement the advice more seriously than those who received it for free? Studies across multiple domains confirm this pattern. People value what they pay for, commit more seriously to investments they make, and dismiss what comes without cost. The expensive consultant is not just protecting their income. They are ensuring their impact. The client who pays well listens carefully. This principle scales down to every interaction. When you agree to help someone despite your own pressing obligations, you are not just being kind. You are teaching them that your obligations do not matter. When you accept disrespect without consequence, you are not avoiding conflict. You are inviting more disrespect. When you make yourself available at all hours, you are not demonstrating dedication. You are establishing that your personal time has no boundaries. Each of these choices seems individually insignificant. Collectively, they form a pattern that communicates your fundamental valuation of yourself. Duh. The Machiavellian insight here is not that you should manipulate others through artificial scarcity. It is that you should honor the natural scarcity that already exists. There is only one of you. You have finite time, finite energy, finite emotional capacity. These things are inherently scarce. Treating them as abundant is living a lie, and others will quickly discover the truth when you collapse under the weight of unlimited commitments. Better to be honest from the beginning. You are valuable. Your resources are limited, and access to both requires respect. This honesty creates something remarkable. When you establish boundaries, you discover who genuinely values you versus who simply found you convenient. The people who disappear when you are no longer freely available were never truly present anyway. They were using you, whether consciously or unconsciously, as a resource to be extracted. Their departure is not a loss. It is clarification. Those who remain, who respect your boundaries, who understand that your time must be earned, these are the relationships worth maintaining. They are built on mutual respect rather than one-sided exploitation. In professional contexts, valuing yourself like gold transforms your trajectory. The freelancer who charges premium rates attracts better clients than the one who competes on price. Why? Because clients paying premium rates are invested in success. They have selected you as an expert, not a commodity. They will listen to your recommendations, implement your strategies, and value your input. The budget client who beats you down on price will question every decision, implement half measures, and blame you for poor results. You will work harder for less money with worse outcomes. This is not speculation. This is the consistent experience of anyone who has worked in consulting, creative services, or any field where pricing is negotiable. The same logic applies to salaried positions. The employee who establishes boundaries, who leaves at reasonable hours, who does not respond to emails on weekends, who declines additional projects when their plate is full, is not being lazy. They are being strategic. They are signaling that they value their work-life balance, that their commitment has limits, and that the company must prioritize how to use their time. The employee who has no boundaries becomes the dumping ground for every unwanted task, precisely because they have trained management that they will accept any burden. When layoffs come, who do you think is more likely to be retained? The person whose contributions are specific and valued, or the person who does everything and is therefore easily replaced? These patterns repeat because they reflect fundamental aspects of human psychology. We are social creatures who constantly assess status, value, and power in our interactions. These assessments happen largely unconsciously through thousands of microsignals we send and receive every day. When you consistently prioritize others' needs over your own, you are sending a clear signal. I am lower status than you. My needs matter less. You can take from me without reciprocity. This signal shapes how others treat you, regardless of their conscious intentions. Even kind, well-meaning people will gradually begin to take advantage of someone who has taught them that advantage-taking carries no cost. The person who values themselves like gold sends a different signal. I am a person of worth. My time matters. My energy is valuable. If you wish to access these resources, you must offer something of equivalent value. This is not arrogance when it reflects genuine self-respect. It is clarity. It is honesty about the reality of human nature and the economy of attention in which we all operate. But here is where the philosophy becomes more subtle. Valuing yourself like gold does not mean becoming rigid, cold, or transactional in every interaction. It means having the discernment to know when to be generous and when to protect your boundaries. The person with strong boundaries can afford to be genuinely generous because they are giving from a place of abundance, not depletion. They can help a friend in crisis without resentment because they have said no to 100 less important requests. They can volunteer their expertise pro bono for a cause they believe in because they charge appropriately elsewhere. Their generosity is a choice, not an expectation. And choice is what transforms obligation into gift. This is the paradox. By making yourself expensive, you make your generosity more valuable. The person who gives freely to everyone makes each individual gift less meaningful. The person who carefully allocates their time and energy makes each allocation a genuine gesture of care. When you help someone despite your busy schedule, they understand the sacrifice. When you have no schedule to sacrifice, the help comes with no perceived cost and therefore no perceived value. Consider also the energy you emit when you value yourself appropriately. There is a confidence, a groundedness that comes from knowing your worth. This is not the brittle, defensive confidence of someone trying to convince themselves and others. It is the quiet assurance of someone who has established boundaries and maintained them, who has weathered the discomfort of saying no and discovered that the world did not end, who has seen their fears of rejection fade as genuine relationships strengthened. This confidence is attractive in every sense. People are drawn to those who seem to value themselves, whether in professional contexts, social situations, or romantic pursuits. There is an unspoken logic. If this person values themselves, perhaps they are valuable. The reverse is equally true. Desperation repels. The job seeker who seems like they will accept any offer gets the worst offers. The romantic partner who seems grateful that anyone would choose them invites being chosen carelessly. The service provider who apologizes for their rates undermines their own value proposition. These are not moral judgments about the people involved, who may be perfectly capable and worthy. They are observations about signaling and social dynamics. You teach people how to treat you through how you treat yourself. Now we must address the fear that prevents most people from implementing this philosophy. The fear of being alone. What if I establish boundaries and everyone leaves? What if I charge what I'm worth and no one hires me? What if I'm not actually as valuable as I think I am? These fears are understandable but reveal a fundamental misunderstanding. You are not creating value by establishing boundaries. You are recognizing value that already exists. If you have genuine skills, real expertise, authentic kindness, actual friendship to offer, these things have value regardless of whether you acknowledge it. The only question is whether you will be compensated fairly for that value or allow it to be extracted for free. And yes, some people will leave when you establish boundaries. Let them. This is not failure. This is filtration. You are discovering who valued you versus who valued what you provided. The friendship that evaporates when you are no longer available at all hours was not a friendship. It was a convenience. The client who disappears when you raise your rates to market value was not a good client. They were someone habituated to taking advantage. The romantic partner who loses interest when you have your own life was not interested in you as a complete person. They wanted someone to fill the gaps in theirs. This filtration process is uncomfortable but essential. It requires tolerating short-term loneliness or financial anxiety for long-term alignment with people and opportunities that genuinely value you. Most people never undergo this process because they cannot tolerate the discomfort. They continue in relationships and situations where they are undervalued because the familiar pain of being taken for granted feels safer than the uncertain pain of setting boundaries. This is how talented people spend years in jobs that underpay them, how capable individuals remain in friendships where they give everything and receive nothing, how the worthy settle for romantic partners who treat them as optional. The irony is that the fear of being alone by valuing yourself leads people to a different kind of aloneness, surrounded by people who do not truly see them, engaged in relationships that provide no genuine connection. working in roles that offer no real satisfaction. This is a loneliness far more profound than the temporary solitude that follows boundary setting. At least in genuine solitude, you have yourself. In the pseudo-connection of being used, you do not even have that. Machiavelli observed that princes who tried to please everyone pleased no one and were eventually overthrown by those they had attempted to appease. The lesson applies beyond politics. The person who tries to be all things to all people becomes nothing to anyone. They have no distinct identity, no clear value proposition, no authentic self to offer. They are a mirror reflecting others' needs, and mirrors, however useful, are never loved. They are replaced without thought when a newer model appears. To be expensive is to declare, I am not for everyone, and that is acceptable. I have specific value for specific people in specific contexts. I am not trying to be universal because universality dilutes potency. The restaurant that tries to serve every type of cuisine serves none well. The professional who claims to be an expert in everything is an expert in nothing. The person who tries to be friends with everyone has no close friends. Specificity, limitation, boundary. These are not weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths to be embraced. They are what make you you, distinct and irreplaceable. This brings us to the second half of our inquiry, which is inseparable from the first. Before you can convince the world to value you like gold, you must destroy the parts of yourself that believe you are worthless. The person who establishes boundaries while secretly believing they deserve none will sabotage every boundary they set. The person who charges premium rates while feeling guilty about their worth will unconsciously undermine their own pricing. The person who demands respect in relationships while feeling unworthy of respect will attract precisely those who provide none. External behavior follows internal conviction. If you wish to be expensive in the eyes of others, you must first be valuable in your own eyes. This is where the transformation begins. In the confrontation with your weak self, the part that seeks approval at any cost, that fears abandonment more than exploitation, that would rather be used than be alone. This weak self must be destroyed, not suppressed, not ignored, but genuinely transformed through confrontation and integration. Because only when you have defeated your own internal conviction of worthlessness can you stand firm when others attempt to devalue you. Only when you have destroyed the part of yourself that believes you should be grateful for scraps can you demand a feast. Part 2. The destruction of the weak self. Every human being carries within them two versions of themselves, the self they could become and the self they currently are, complete with all its limitations, fears, and self-sabotaging patterns. The distance between these two selves is filled with the comfortable lies we tell ourselves, the coping mechanisms we have developed to avoid pain, and the weak behaviors we have come to accept as unchangeable parts of our personality. Most people spend their lives trying to be comfortable with this weak self, to accept their limitations, to make peace with mediocrity. This is a fundamental error. The weak self is not to be accepted. It is to be destroyed. When we speak of destroying the weak self, we are not discussing simple self-improvement or the addition of good habits to an unchanged personality. We're discussing the systematic dismantling of the psychological structures that keep you small, safe, and stuck. We are discussing the willingness to confront every comfortable delusion you have constructed about why you cannot have what you want, achieve what you desire, or become who you could be. We are discussing nothing less than psychological warfare against your own limitations, with the understanding that the enemy is not some external force but the version of yourself that has accommodated to suffering. The weak self has many faces, and most people recognize only the obvious manifestations. They see their procrastination, their people-pleasing, their inability to say no, their pattern of dating the same dysfunctional person in different bodies, their comfort zone that has become a comfort prison. These are symptoms. The disease runs deeper. The weak self is characterized not by specific behaviors but by a fundamental orientation toward life. The preference for safety over growth, for comfort over achievement, for being liked over being respected, for avoiding pain over pursuing purpose. This orientation is not natural. You were not born this way. Children are fearless, curious, and honest to a fault. They do what they want, say what they think, and pursue what interests them without regard for social approval or risk of failure. The weak self is constructed gradually through a series of lessons learned from pain. You expressed your authentic self and were punished for it, so you learned to hide. You pursued something challenging and failed, so you learned to avoid challenge. You trusted someone and were betrayed, so you learn to trust no one. Each of these lessons was rational in its moment. The problem is that you have continued applying childhood lessons to adult circumstances where they no longer serve you. The first step in destroying the weak self is recognition. You must develop the capacity to see clearly when you are operating from fear rather than choice, from conditioning rather than authentic desire, from weakness rather than strength. This requires brutal honesty, the kind that most people avoid at all costs because it is uncomfortable to acknowledge how much of your life is driven by cowardice rather than circumstance. It is easier to blame your dead-end job on the economy than to admit you are afraid to apply for better positions. It is more comfortable to blame your relationship dissatisfaction on your partner than to acknowledge you chose someone safe rather than someone exciting. It is less painful to claim you don't have time for your goals than to admit you are afraid of failing if you actually try. This recognition process is painful because it strips away every excuse. The weak self survives through excuse-making. It constructs elaborate narratives about why you cannot act, why circumstances are against you, why other people have advantages you lack, why now is not the right time. These narratives are sophisticated and convincing because they are designed to be. The weak self is not stupid. It is strategic. It knows that the path of growth involves discomfort, uncertainty, and the risk of failure. So it constructs reasons why growth is impossible, unwise, or unnecessary. It recruits your intelligence in service of your limitations. Consider the person who claims they cannot start their business because they need more skills, more capital, more contacts, more certainty. Each of these needs is rational in isolation. Collectively, they form an impenetrable wall of prerequisites that can never be fully satisfied. There will always be one more skill to acquire, one more dollar to save, one more connection to make. The weak self uses the language of prudence to justify paralysis. It sounds wise. I'm being responsible, not impulsive. I'm preparing properly. But observe what happens over years. The person who was not ready 5 years ago is still not ready today with 5 more years of reasons why. Meanwhile, others with fewer skills, less money, and worse circumstances have launched and failed and learned and succeeded. The difference is not in external circumstances, but in internal orientation. Some people operate from what do I need to begin? Others operate from what do I need to avoid beginning? The weak self also manifests in relationships as the desperate need to be liked, to avoid conflict, to maintain harmony at any cost. This seems noble until you recognize its true nature. It is the unwillingness to risk rejection even when the alternative is accepting unacceptable behavior. The person who cannot say no, who swallows their dissatisfaction, who pretends to agree when they disagree, who apologizes for things they did not do wrong, this person is not kind. They are afraid. They are so terrified of abandonment that they will abandon themselves first, preemptively eliminating their own needs so that others do not have to do it for them. This pattern creates a particular hell. By hiding your authentic self to avoid rejection, you ensure that any acceptance you receive is for a false self you have constructed. This is not acceptance at all. It is a successful con job. And deep down you know this. You know that if people saw the real you, the angry you, the needy you, the judgmental you, the scared you, they might leave. So you maintain the performance, growing increasingly resentful of the very people whose approval you sought. Bitter that they do not appreciate the sacrifices you made that they never asked you to make. The weak self has trapped you in a prison of your own construction, and the guards are your terror of being truly known. Destroying this pattern requires something that feels like suicide to the weak self. Complete honesty even when it risks rejection. This means expressing your actual opinions, stating your real needs, establishing genuine boundaries, and allowing people to have their authentic reactions. Some will indeed leave. The weak self was correct about that. What the weak self did not understand is that their leaving clarifies rather than diminishes your life. You discover that you can survive rejection. You discover that honesty attracts people you actually like, rather than people who like your performance. You discover that you were afraid of a manageable pain while accepting an unbearable one. In professional contexts, the weak self manifests as settling, the talented person who remains in a job beneath their capabilities because they fear the uncertainty of searching. The creative who never shares their work because they fear criticism. The employee who accepts poor treatment because they fear they cannot find better. The entrepreneur who never launches because they fear failure. In each case, the weak self has convinced the person that the pain of remaining stuck is less than the pain of attempting growth. This calculation is always wrong. The pain of staying stuck accumulates every single day for years or decades, while the pain of attempting growth is acute but temporary. One is a chronic disease. The other is surgery that leads to healing. But the weak self is clever. It does not argue that you should stay stuck forever. It argues for delay. Not now is its favorite phrase. After I save more money, after I gain more experience, after my kids are older, after the market improves, after I feel more confident. There is always a reasonable-sounding reason to wait. And there always will be. The conditions will never be perfect because perfect conditions do not exist. The weak self knows this. It is not actually waiting for better conditions. It is waiting for you to give up on your desires so it can maintain its comfortable, familiar suffering. Destroying the weak self requires recognizing that the discomfort you feel when contemplating change is not a sign that change is wrong. It is a sign that change is happening. Your psychological immune system treats any departure from established patterns as a threat, regardless of whether those patterns serve you. This is why leaving an abusive relationship feels terrifying even though staying is destroying you. This is why starting your creative practice feels impossible even though you desperately want to create. This is why having difficult but necessary conversations makes you nauseous even though you know they must happen. The discomfort is not information about the rightness of your choice. It is simply the weak self's last attempt to maintain control. The destruction process itself follows a pattern. First comes recognition, seeing clearly where you are operating from weakness rather than strength. Second comes the decision, choosing to act despite the fear rather than because the fear has disappeared. Third comes action, doing the thing that terrifies you. Fourth comes reality, discovering that the catastrophe you imagined does not occur, or if it does, that you survive it. Fifth comes integration, incorporating the lesson that you are more capable than you believed, that risks can be managed, that your fears were often larger than the reality they protected you from. This cycle must be repeated thousands of times across every domain of your life where the weak self has established dominion. You must have the difficult conversation you have been avoiding and discover you survive. You must set the boundary you fear setting and discover that healthy relationships strengthen while exploitative ones end. You must attempt the project you fear failing at and discover that failure teaches more than inaction ever could. You must say no to the good opportunity that would distract from the great one and discover that focus creates results. Each of these cycles weakens the weak self and strengthens the emerging strong self. The strong self is not the opposite of the weak self. It is the integrated self. It contains all the same impulses toward fear and safety, but it does not allow these impulses to dictate action. The strong self feels fear and acts anyway. It experiences the desire for approval and chooses authenticity regardless. It recognizes risk and proceeds with eyes open. It is not fearless. It is fear-mastering. This distinction is crucial. The person who feels no fear is either delusional or sociopathic. The person who feels fear and acts in alignment with their values despite it is courageous. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more than the fear. As you destroy the weak self through repeated confrontation with your fears, something remarkable happens. You begin to trust yourself, not in the childish way of believing you will never fail or suffer, but in the mature recognition that you can handle whatever comes. You have evidence accumulated through dozens or hundreds of difficult situations you navigated, problems you solved, fears you faced, disasters you survived. This self-trust is the foundation of genuine confidence, the kind that cannot be shaken by others' opinions because it is not based on others' opinions. It is based on your demonstrated capacity to handle reality. This self-trust transforms your relationship with risk. The person who does not trust themselves sees risk as existential threat. The person who trusts themselves sees risk as probability to be managed. They can start the business because they know that even if it fails, they will learn and try again. They can enter the relationship because they know that even if it ends badly, they will recover and find another. They can attempt the creative work because they know that even if it is criticized, they will create more. The outcome of any individual attempt becomes less important than the pattern of attempting. This is freedom. When your identity is based not on outcomes but on your willingness to try. But destroying the weak self creates one final confrontation that many people never anticipate: the reaction of others. When you change, you disrupt the entire ecosystem of relationships that formed around your previous patterns. The friend who relied on your unlimited availability becomes resentful when you establish boundaries. The family member who treated you as the problem solver becomes upset when you refuse to solve their problems. The romantic partner who enjoyed your lack of demands becomes threatened when you begin to have standards. These reactions are not about you. They are about the loss of what you provided when you were weaker. This is the crucial test. The strong self must be willing to lose relationships that require your weakness to function. This sounds harsh until you recognize that these relationships were already costing you everything. You were not being valued. You were being used. Your transformation did not create the problem. It revealed the problem that always existed. The person who loved you for your weakness never loved you. They loved what they could extract from you. The person who loved you for your strength will celebrate your growth even when it makes their life less convenient. Here we see the connection between the two halves of this philosophy. You cannot value yourself like gold until you have destroyed the part of yourself that believes you are worthless. You cannot establish boundaries that others respect until you have confronted the internal voice that says you deserve none. You cannot charge what you are worth until you have dismantled the belief that you should be grateful for whatever scraps you receive. The internal transformation must precede the external transformation, or the external changes will collapse under the weight of unchanged internal conviction. The man who destroys his weak self cannot be destroyed by others because he has already done the worst to himself. He has confronted his deepest fears and discovered them to be survivable. He has acknowledged his flaws and decided to grow through them rather than hide from them. He has faced rejection, failure, and hardship, and learned that none of these things destroy him. They only destroy the illusions he had about himself and life. Once you have destroyed your own illusions, no one else can threaten you with their revelation. Once you have accepted your own worst, no one else's judgment carries power. Once you have survived your own internal war, external battles become manageable. This does not mean becoming cold or invulnerable. The strong self is not armored, it is resilient. It still feels pain, disappointment, and sadness, but these emotions pass through rather than lodge permanently. It still desires connection, love, and recognition, but these desires do not become desperate needs that override self-respect. It still hopes for success, but that hope does not prevent attempting when success is uncertain. The strong self is fully alive to all emotions while being controlled by none. The process of destroying the weak self is never complete. This is not defeatism. It is realism. You will face new situations that trigger old fears. You will discover new layers of conditioning you had not previously recognized. You will sometimes regress to old patterns under stress. This is normal. The goal is not perfection, but direction. Are you stronger this year than last year? Are you more honest? Are you setting better boundaries? Are you taking more risks in service of your growth? If yes, you are succeeding, even if you are not perfect. Progress, not perfection, is the standard. Part 3. The Indestructible Self. When you have destroyed your weak self and established your worth in your own eyes, something fundamental shifts in how you move through the world. You become indestructible not through invulnerability, but through anti-fragility. You gain strength from challenges rather than being diminished by them. You welcome difficulty as the arena where your capabilities are proven and expanded. You stop fearing the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune because you have discovered that you are the bow, not the arrow. You shape circumstances rather than being shaped by them. This is the ultimate Machiavellian insight, that the person who has mastered themselves becomes uncontrollable by others. The prince who relies on others' approval can be manipulated through the granting or withdrawal of that approval. The prince who knows his own worth, who has confronted his own weaknesses and emerged stronger, who has established clear principles and boundaries. This prince cannot be bought, threatened, or seduced into betraying himself. He is not rigid or inflexible, but he bends consciously as strategy, not unconsciously as weakness. He yields when yielding serves his purpose, and stands firm when standing firm does. Let us examine what indestructibility looks like in practical terms, for this is not abstract philosophy, but concrete reality. In professional contexts, the indestructible person cannot be exploited, not because they are difficult or uncooperative, but because they have clear boundaries around their time, energy, and skills. When asked to work unpaid overtime, they do not comply out of fear or feel guilty for declining. They recognize that their time has value, and that the request itself is unreasonable. They can say no, that does not work for me without elaborate justification or apology. The clarity itself is powerful. Most people cannot do this because they fear the consequences. Anger, disappointment, the label of being not a team player. The indestructible person has already faced these consequences internally and decided that their self-respect matters more. What happens next is instructive. In the short term, there may indeed be friction. The manager who expected compliance becomes frustrated. Colleagues who have accepted exploitation may resent the person who refuses it, but watch what happens over time. The person with boundaries is respected more, not less. They are assigned to important projects because they deliver quality work within reasonable hours rather than rushed work at all hours. They advance because they demonstrate self-respect, and self-respect is read as competence. They avoid burnout because they maintain sustainability. Meanwhile, the person with no boundaries gradually becomes the office doormat, assigned every unwanted task precisely because they have trained everyone that they will accept any burden. This pattern is not coincidental. It reflects a deep truth about human hierarchies. We assess each other's value partly through how they value themselves. The person who acts as if their time is worthless teaches everyone that it is. The person who acts as if their time is valuable trains everyone to treat it carefully. This is not manipulation. It is education. You are constantly teaching people how to treat you through what you accept, what you reject, what you reward with your continued presence, and what you punish with your absence. In relationships, the indestructible person creates an entirely different dynamic. They enter relationships as a complete individual choosing partnership, not as a half-person seeking completion. This distinction transforms everything. The complete person says, I have my own life, my own interests, my own friends, my own goals. I choose to share some of my time with you because you add value to my life. If you cease adding value, if you become disrespectful or exploitative, I will leave. Not in anger, not with drama, simply as a rational recognition that the relationship no longer serves me. This sounds cold only to those accustomed to dysfunctional relationship dynamics where people cling to each other out of fear rather than choosing each other out of genuine desire. The indestructible person is actually offering something far more valuable than desperate clinging. They are offering their conscious choice. Every day they stay is a day they chose you. Every moment spent together is a moment they could have spent elsewhere but didn't. This makes every moment meaningful. Compare this to the relationship where someone stays because they fear being alone, because they have invested too much to leave, because they think they cannot do better. That person is present in body but absent in spirit. Their continued presence means nothing because it is not chosen. It is merely the absence of courage to leave. The indestructible person also refuses to play the games that characterize unhealthy relationships. They do not manipulate through guilt, do not punish through withdrawal, do not test through creating unnecessary drama. These tactics rely on the other person's fear of loss. The indestructible person has no such fear. They know they would survive the end of the relationship, therefore they do not need to control through fear. This creates space for genuine connection. When two indestructible people come together, the relationship is characterized by choice, honesty, and mutual respect. When one person is indestructible and the other is not, the relationship either elevates the weaker person or ends. When neither person is indestructible, the relationship becomes a toxic dance of mutual manipulation. The indestructible person also demonstrates a particular relationship with failure. They do not fear failure because they have failed many times in the process of destroying their weak self. They understand that failure is information, not identity. The business that fails teaches lessons for the next business. The rejected proposal teaches how to craft better proposals. The ended relationship teaches what to look for and what to avoid in the next one. Each failure is a data point in the larger experiment of building a successful life. The person who has never failed is the person who has never tried anything difficult, and their supposed success is actually the successful avoidance of challenge. This reframing of failure is liberating. Most people are paralyzed by the fear of failure, which is actually fear of judgment, their own and others. The indestructible person has already judged themselves harshly in the process of confronting their weak self. They know their flaws intimately, so external judgment carries little weight. Someone criticizes their work, they evaluate whether the criticism is valid and make adjustments if so, or dismiss it if not. Someone mocks their ambitions, They recognize this as the other person's limitation, not their own. Someone predicts their failure. They understand that most predictions say more about the predictor than the subject. This imperviousness to judgment is not arrogance. The arrogant person secretly fears they are worthless and compensates through defensive superiority. The indestructible person knows their worth through evidence. They have attempted difficult things, survived failures, learned from mistakes, and gradually built competence. Their confidence is not a feeling they have to maintain through denial of reality. It is a conclusion they have reached through observation of their demonstrated capabilities. This kind of confidence cannot be shaken by others because it is not based on others' perceptions. Consider how the indestructible person handles criticism. Instead of becoming defensive or crushed, they analyze it. Is this criticism true? If yes, it is valuable information about how to improve. Is it false? Then it is noise to be dismissed. Is it partially true? Then extract the useful insight and discard the rest. Notice what does not happen. They do not take criticism as evidence of their worthlessness. They do not ruminate about it for days. They do not seek reassurance from others that the criticism was wrong. They simply process it as information and move on. This is possible only when you have already done the hard work of establishing your worth independent of any individual's opinion. The indestructible person also handles success differently. They do not become attached to it or allow it to define them. They recognize that success and failure are both temporary states in the continuous process of attempting things. The successful business could fail, the healthy relationship could end, the celebrated work could be forgotten. These possibilities do not diminish the current success. They simply provide realistic context. The person who is attached to success becomes desperate to maintain it, making conservative choices out of fear rather than bold choices out of strength. The indestructible person can risk their success because their identity is not dependent on maintaining it. They are not the success. They are the person capable of creating success, which means they could create it again if necessary. This relationship with success creates an interesting paradox. By caring less about success in terms of attachment, the indestructible person often achieves more success than those desperately pursuing it. Why? Because they are willing to take the risks that lead to breakthrough results. They can pivot when strategies are not working. Instead of doubling down on failing approaches out of ego, they can admit mistakes and learn from them instead of defending them. They can collaborate without needing to get all the credit. They can accept feedback without becoming defensive. All of these capabilities stem from having destroyed the ego-driven, weak self that needs to be right, to be celebrated, to be validated constantly. In financial matters, the indestructible person demonstrates a particular relationship with money that differs markedly from both the greedy and the impoverished mindset. They understand that money is a tool for creating freedom and security, not a measure of human worth. Therefore, they charge appropriately for their skills without apology, negotiate effectively without desperation, and make financial decisions strategically rather than emotionally. They can walk away from bad deals because they trust their ability to find or create better ones. They invest in themselves, in education, skills, health, and relationships, because they recognize that their capabilities are their primary asset. They are neither cheap with themselves nor wasteful, but strategic about how resources are allocated. This financial confidence stems from having destroyed the scarcity mindset of the weak self. The weak self believes that every opportunity is the last opportunity, that every deal must be accepted regardless of terms, that asking for what you are worth will result in getting nothing. The indestructible person has tested these beliefs and found them false. They have asked for more and received it. They have walked away from bad deals and found better ones. They have invested in themselves and seen returns. This evidence-based confidence allows them to make better financial decisions than those operating from fear. The indestructible person also demonstrates a particular approach to adversity. They do not collapse when things go wrong, nor do they pretend things are fine when they are not. They acknowledge reality clearly and then focus on what can be done about it. This practical orientation comes from understanding that complaining, blaming, or denying accomplish nothing, while analysis and action can change circumstances. When faced with a setback, they ask, "What can I learn from this? What can I change going forward? What is within my control?" These questions orient them toward agency rather than victimhood. They recognize that while they cannot control everything that happens to them, they can control their response. And the response determines the outcome more than the initial event. This agency is perhaps the defining characteristic of the indestructible person. They operate from the fundamental belief that they shape their life through their choices, even when circumstances are difficult. This is not naive optimism that everything will work out. It is the mature recognition that life presents challenges, some of them severe, and that you get to choose whether you are defeated by these challenges or forged stronger by them. The indestructible person chooses strength every time. But perhaps most importantly, the indestructible person has transcended the need for life to be easy. They have discovered something that most people never learn. Difficulty is not the enemy. Avoidance of difficulty is. Every capability you possess was developed through difficulty. You learn to walk by falling repeatedly. You learn to read through initial confusion. You developed any skill through initial incompetence and gradual improvement. Difficulty is the price of growth, and the indestructible person has decided that growth is worth the price. They actively seek challenges that will expand their capabilities, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they value becoming. This orientation creates a life that looks very different from the comfort-seeking existence most people pursue. While others are arranging their lives to minimize discomfort, the indestructible person is arranging theirs to maximize growth. While others avoid difficult conversations, the indestructible person initiates them. While others stay in comfortable mediocrity, the indestructible person pursues uncomfortable excellence. While others wait for perfect conditions, the indestructible person acts under imperfect ones. The cumulative effect over years is dramatic. The comfort seeker remains essentially unchanged, perhaps more risk-averse and less capable with age. The growth seeker becomes progressively more capable, confident, and free. The freedom is the ultimate prize. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, that is, adolescent freedom, constrained by impulse and lack of self-control, but the freedom to shape your life according to your values, to walk away from what does not serve you, to pursue what matters to you regardless of others' opinions, to stand firm in your boundaries, to act on your ambitions despite fear. This freedom is earned through the destruction of the weak self and cannot be given or taken away. It is internal and therefore inviolable. This brings us full circle to where we began. Valuing yourself like gold. You can now see that this is not a superficial technique about playing hard to get or manipulating others through artificial scarcity. It is the natural consequence of having done the deep work of destroying your weak self. When you genuinely know your worth because you have proven it to yourself through hundreds of small battles with your own limitations, you cannot help but value yourself. And when you value yourself, you naturally establish boundaries, charge appropriately, and expect respect. You do not do these things to manipulate outcomes. You do them because anything else would be betraying your hard-won self-knowledge. The man who destroys his weak self cannot be destroyed by others because destruction is no longer a threat he fears. He has already undergone voluntary destruction of everything that kept him small. He has burned away the fear, the need for approval, the desperation, the weakness. What remains is anti-fragile. It grows stronger under pressure, gains from disorder, learns from failure. You cannot hurt someone who has already hurt themselves in the service of growth. You cannot shake someone who has already shaken themselves to their foundation and rebuilt stronger. You cannot diminish someone who has already confronted their own insignificance and decided to become significant anyway. This is not the end of struggle. The indestructible person still faces challenges, setbacks, losses, pain. Life continues to happen to everyone, and no amount of personal development makes you immune to circumstances. But the indestructible person processes these experiences differently. Where others see defeat, they see learning. Where others see ending, they see transition. Where others see proof of their inadequacy, they see calls to develop new capabilities. The difference is not in what happens, but in the interpretation and response. Ultimately, this philosophy is about taking absolute responsibility for your life, not blame. Blame is about the past and fault. Responsibility is about the present and agency. You are responsible for recognizing where you have been, undervaluing yourself, and choosing differently. You were responsible for identifying your weak self and systematically destroying it through confrontation with your fears. You were responsible for establishing boundaries and maintaining them even when it is uncomfortable. You are responsible for your growth, your relationships, your career, your financial situation, your health, your happiness, not because you caused all the circumstances you find yourself in, but because you are the only one who can respond to them. This responsibility is not a burden, it is liberation. As long as you blame circumstances, other people, or bad luck for your situation, you are powerless. You are a leaf blown by the wind, hoping the wind happens to blow in a favorable direction. When you take responsibility, you become the wind. You still face constraints, obstacles, and challenges, but you are actively shaping outcomes rather than passively experiencing them. This shift from passive to active, from victim to agent, from powerless to powerful, this is what it means to be indestructible. The world will test you. It always does. People will try to exploit your generosity, to take advantage of your kindness, to manipulate your empathy. Organizations will try to extract maximum value for minimum compensation. Romantic partners will test your boundaries to see if you maintain them. Friends will take what you freely give and ask for more. None of this is malicious. It is simply human nature, operating according to the economic principles that govern all interactions. People maximize their benefit within whatever constraints you establish. If you establish no constraints, they will maximize until you break. If you establish clear constraints, they will operate within them or remove themselves from your life. Your job is to establish and maintain the constraints, knowing that those who respect them are worth keeping and those who do not are worth losing. In the end, valuing yourself like gold and destroying your weak self are not separate projects, they are two descriptions of the same transformation. You cannot genuinely value yourself while your weak self whispers that you are worthless. You cannot destroy your weak self without simultaneously discovering and claiming your worth. The two processes support and reinforce each other. Each boundary you set provides evidence that you value yourself, which makes it easier to set the next boundary. Each fear you confront weakens the weak self, which makes confronting the next fear less daunting. Progress in one domain accelerates progress in the other until a tipping point is reached. You become someone who naturally values themselves, who naturally acts from strength, who naturally expects respect and reciprocity in all interactions. This is not an act you put on. It is who you have become, and once you have become this person, you are indestructible. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because nothing can destroy you. You have destroyed yourself already. The false self, the weak self, the fearful self, and rebuilt from the foundation. What you have built cannot be shaken by others because it is not based on others. It is based on evidence you have gathered about your own capabilities, principles you have tested under pressure, boundaries you have maintained despite discomfort, and growth you have achieved through voluntary suffering. This foundation is yours alone. Others did not give it to you, so others cannot take it away. This is the final teaching. You must become expensive not to keep others out, but to keep yourself in. You must value yourself like gold, not to impress the world, but to honor the work you have done becoming someone worth valuing. You must destroy your weak self not because weakness is shameful, but because you have greatness waiting to emerge. And weakness is what blocks its emergence. The man who destroys his weak self cannot be destroyed by others because he has already survived the only war that matters, the war against his own limitations. And having won that war, all others become manageable. Walk through the world then, as gold walks through the marketplace, rare, valuable, and unashamed of either quality. Establish your worth not through arrogance, but through the quiet confidence of someone who knows what they have overcome to become who they are. Set your boundaries not to punish others, but to honor yourself. Charge what you are worth not to exclude, but to ensure that those who access your time, energy, and expertise value what they receive. And when others attempt to diminish you, know that they cannot. You have already walked through fire to forge yourself into something stronger. Their attempts to burn you will only reveal that you have become inflammable. This is the ultimate freedom, to be simultaneously expensive and indestructible, to know your worth and require that others recognize it, to have destroyed your weak self so thoroughly that others' attempts to exploit your weaknesses find no purchase, to value yourself so completely that you need neither validation nor permission from anyone to live according to your principles. This is not the end of the journey. There is no end, only continuous refinement and growth. But it is the beginning of truly living, of moving through the world as a conscious agent shaping circumstances rather than a passive victim experiencing them. And that beginning changes everything.